Hello. A most uncertain time calls for most uncertain delivery of courses. This is David Cadet, and I am going to give you today your talk on pricing strategies for marketing essentials. To some of you, this will be MKTG 260. To others, it will be MKTG 1060. Same lecture, same notes, same study points. If you're following along on D2L, this will be found in the file MKTG 260 Module 7, Pricing Strategies. Are you ready? Are you okay? Perhaps I should have started that way. I hope you're doing well, coping physically and mentally with these strange times that we're living in. It's very unusual for me to be deliberately talking in an empty classroom. Sometimes I send you guys out and then I kind of make fun of the fact that you're not learning in class and you're learning out of class. Well, joke's on me, because now, presumably for the rest of the semester, you will be learning out of class. So hopefully I'll be up to the task. Anyway, so cue up the Module 7 lecture notes. That's Module 7 Pricing Strategy found in your D2L. And we'll begin. The first thing that you're looking at there is a very fundamental economics concept called the demand curve. The demand curve asserts that, all things being equal, as we decrease price, we increase quantity demanded, and as we increase price, we decrease quantity demanded. All of this makes perfect sense most of the time, but it does have some exceptions. Those exceptions we're probably not going to get into here. It's kind of an advanced and even an obscure level that sort of thing happens. So that's what you see, that very boring looking downward arrow on a horizontal and vertical axis is the demand curve. Why is that the lead slide in a talk about pricing? Because pricing is one of the 4 Ps and represents what we need to know about our customers in terms of how they interpret price. Price is as much psychological as it is mathematical. In slide 2, you'll see the things that we're going to cover in this talk and things that you need to know to pass this course, to analyze in your report, and to answer questions in your quizzes. Quiz 2 coming and final exam on its way as well, and more details on those things as the semester progresses. So our objectives are to discuss the elements of price, so the things that go into price. Pricing objectives, there are many. We'll cover 4. Pricing strategies, there are many. We'll cover 5. And pricing tactics, there are even more. And we'll talk about 3. So those are the things we're going to cover, along to some things that we need to do after we've launched the product and we need to react to what the market says, because the market is always right. So we're on to slide 3, elements of price. These are the 4 fundamental things that we need to include in coming up with a price, from left to right: costs, demand, competition, and elasticity. Fancy word there at the end that you may not have heard too much about or don't recall from your intro courses in semester 1. So we'll cover that here as well. I like to think about setting a price using an analogy of a house, which is now slide 4 in your deck. The house represents probably the 2 most important factors to consider when setting a price: the demand and the costs. And I've wired myself here, hopefully with enough cable, to go back to my whiteboard. I'm really going to try and do this integratively. The house, it's a funny sound, the house is a great metaphor because houses have roofs and floors. The roof in our house metaphor represents market demand, and the floor represents costs. So intellectually, we know that if we price our product too low, below what it costs to actually make our product, somewhere down here, we're going to lose money on every sale and go out of business. Conversely, if we get greedy, if we take advantage of what we think is a hot market and we price our product above demand, so more than what the market is willing to pay, well, we won't sell anything and we'll go out of business for a different reason. So the house is a pretty good metaphor. Thou shalt not price products too high or too low. So that's the slide 4 for you. Into slide 5, we get into the elasticity concept. Price elasticity is something that affects products which are non-essential, which are in a space that has many competitors, many substitutes, not necessarily always luxury items, but things we don't need at a base level, if you want to think about Maslow. Things that we do need at a base level, food and shelter and gasoline and things like that, will be inelastic products. So those that demand won't change that much, irrespective of how we price them. So now is a very good example to talk about gasoline. We've got record low gasoline prices here in Calgary. We haven't seen in decades. But that doesn't mean we're filling up and driving around for the sake of driving, any more than when the price of gasoline is 60 cents higher than it is today, doesn't mean that we're driving any less. Now, for some of us, there's a breaking point where we'll stop driving because gas is too high, but we're not going to drive more because gas is so low. Those are examples of what it means to be inelastic. Now, elastic products would include things like computers, phones, those new shoes you've been eyeing, a nice meal out. All of these things are considered non-essential items, and they've got lots of competitors as well. And so when their price drops, we will buy more, but when their price increases, we will buy less. So that's this whole concept of the demand curve. The demand curve is a graphical representation of price elasticity, which is a fancy representation of probably a more digestible, certainly easier to pronounce phrase called price sensitivity. So you see that in your slide here. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see some of the elements or some of the characteristics of inelastic versus elastic types of products. And on the right-hand side, you see the demand curve. And what the curve indicates is, just as we've talked about before, as price goes up, demand goes down. And as price goes down, demand goes up. That's slide 5. On to slide 6. Lots of different things to consider with price, not the least of which is competition, another one of your elements of price. Mostly what we talk about in Marketing Essentials has to do with consumer products, things that we're all familiar with, brands that we're all familiar with. And most of these producers, most of these sellers, fall into this monopolistic competition category. That is, there are lots of them doing similar things, but in different ways. So BMW will be doing things much different than Hyundai. Doesn't mean Hyundais are bad vehicles. In fact, some would say they're better. But there's different cost components and different ways of building. Some automation versus handmade and hand assembled and so on. And so when you have that variety of cost inputs, you will have a lot of different players providing the same solution to a problem, i.e. getting around in a vehicle, but doing it in different ways. And that presents this environment of a monopolistic competition. So a lot of our consumer goods and services are in monopolistic competition. On the far left of the spectrum, we have monopolies. And I know you're familiar with that word. It's one of the most famous board games in the world, around the world. But there aren't many monopolies that exist anymore. And ironically, because governments have tried to stop monopolies, it's usually government organizations which are monopolies. And I try to figure out or come up with an example of an existing monopoly. And I always come back to BC Ferry, which is a BC provincially run ferry service that gets you and your vehicle between the mainland of BC to many of the different islands in BC. That's the only way you can get your car to any of those islands, unless, of course, you decide to independently transport it or rev up the engine and try and take it over a ramp, which might have dire consequences. So that's an example of a monopoly. BC Ferries has a monopoly on transporting goods and people in their cars across the Georgia Strait to those islands. Duopolies, a little bit more familiar in our environment. Don't be too confused or thrown off by the the root word is what I'm looking for. Duo in here. A duopoly isn't necessarily a competition that is comprised of just two companies. It could be three, it could be four. But the key component here is that there are a small handful of companies which command the entire industry. So we have a duopoly in airlines in Canada. Almost literally, Air Canada and WestJet command or consume most of the economics in commercial travel in this country. There's a couple of small players as well, but most of it is based on WestJet and Air Canada. So that's a duopoly. And over on the far right, we have the opposite end of the spectrum, which is pure competition. And pure competition is hundreds, thousands, almost an infinite number of different producers doing almost the exact same thing at the exact same price. You think about commodities here. You think about farmers producing wheat or corn or soy. Thousands of them in North America. There's no difference in corn between Iowa and Alberta, although people in Taber would argue, but you get the point. And so monopolistic competitions represent sort of the middle point between pure competition and monopoly. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, you can always email me with questions on any of these things or anything having to do with the course as we go through this different time. All right. Also, when considering price, you have to consider your perspective as a seller and customer's perspective as the buyer. Remember that price represents one half of the value equation. So customers see our products for what they offer in terms of quality and what we need to sacrifice in terms of price. And they make that almost instantaneous interpretation as to whether it is worth it or not. So it represents in some way a savings to customer, whereas on the producer side, it represents profit. Obviously, the higher your price relative to the costs that you incurred to bring the product to market will increase or decrease the profit delivered to you. So also some important elements of price. Now I'm going to pepper you with various terms that you need to know and apply for your current project, but also for your quiz and your final exam. There are many different pricing objectives, strategies, and tactics. We're only going to cover a handful of each. So from an objective standpoint, think of objectives as goals. They're more specific than goals, and in fact in business we call them SMART objectives. SMART, measure or specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. I'm not going to get you to write SMART objectives for this report, but it's a good thing to know. So objectives are specific goals that we try to achieve with our pricing in this case. And there are 4 kind of common pricing objectives. So think of these as target points. The profit objective is shared by all for-profit companies. So right off the bat, when you're writing about the pricing objective of the company that you're analyzing for your report, make sure to include the fact that, of course, one of their objectives is profit. They want to make money. But from that point down on this slide, we're looking at market share, market demand, and volume. And that's where things differ depending on where the company is in the environment, what sort of a brand it is, and so on. So a market share pricing objective is typically a lower price strategy. Here we attempt to penetrate the market, to make more room in the market for our product. And usually what that requires, based on that demand curve that we talked about earlier on, is a lower price. So lower price, increase sales, increase market share. A market demand objective, on the other hand, has more to do with taking advantage of that ceiling, about estimating just how much the market is willing to pay for your good or service, for your product, and then trying to get that price as close to that ceiling as possible without losing customers on the other end. So that's a market demand objective. And then at the bottom there you see a volume objective, and this is similar to a market share objective, but it has kind of a different intention. With market share, you're trying to introduce and get a product into the market. With volume objective, you are kind of trying to get a product out of your hands and into the market in a different way. So last year's stuff, last season's stuff that has become obsolete in terms of demand in the view of most customers. A volume pricing objective means we're trying to get rid of things as quickly as we can, and therefore typically requires a lower pricing strategy. Let's get on to strategies. So if objectives are the target, strategies are the means in which we use to get to the target. And we've got 5 different strategies to cover here. Again, there are many more than this. We're just going to give you the basics. On the far left of your screen, we're looking at slide number 9 in your songbook, because you're following along, your slide deck, at proactive pricing strategies. We consider, of course, where we are as a brand, what our objectives are based on the last slide, and then of course everything going on in the environment as well will always figure into this. But all things being equal, on the left-hand side we have a penetration pricing strategy. This strategy is a low price strategy. It is used to get into the market, and it follows suit with that volume or market share pricing objectives. So low price, penetration. A higher than penetration price but lower than competition average price is called value pricing. So we're going to try and get into the market here at a little higher than what one would expect at a penetration level, but lower than the average competitor's price. The matching competition is the average price offered by competitors. So here we try and just sort of cluster ourselves within that competitive average, maybe a little less, maybe a little bit high. All of those things become psychological and hair splitting after that, but matching competition is a pricing strategy. Skimming and prestige are both high price strategies, but sort of with different intentions as well. A prestige strategy is meant to be a sustained high price strategy. So a brand that represents itself as high end, that usually incurs higher costs to bring its product to market, that mixes in an element of perceived value with the way it makes products, everything from the brand to the components of the product, would be prestige pricing. They're using this almost as a psychological effect to get people to think, high price must be high quality. And if the brand is established as being high quality, then it's easy to pull off. Not so easy if you're just starting. A skimming strategy, on the other hand, is typically reserved for new to the world, brand new innovations, cool products that everyone's been waiting for. And as a result, skimming should be used really in those limited circumstances. You might think that you have a cool new product that everybody wants, but unless you're Apple with the iPhone when it was introduced 13 years ago, or Tesla with electric cars, or Sony when Sony first launched its plasma or flat screen TVs as they were called in the late 90s, you don't want to use a skimming strategy. So skimming pricing strategies are for new to the world, much anticipated products, and in fact, an inordinately high price, sometimes even higher than a prestige price, used to attract attention. So the high price becomes part of the buzz to generate this flywheel effect to help move brand new innovative products out of the warehouse and into homes and cars and so on. We're getting there. Pricing tactics. So this is slide 10 on your deck. Pricing tactics are even more varied and common than pricing strategies. I shouldn't say common. There's a lot more tactics than there are strategies. There's a lot of ways of mixing and matching pricing tactics. What's the difference between a tactic and a strategy? Think of tactics as the steps you take in a journey, whereas the journey itself is the strategy and the destination is the objective. So here are some tactics. Just 3 I'm naming. There are many more in your MindTap for Marketing and tons more online. But these are some of the things that would resonate with you and that you recognize right away. An odd pricing tactic is the old but true and still tried and true tactic of using somewhat less than threshold numbers to set a price to create an illusion of a deal. I always laugh and still laugh even at myself when I come home having spent $395 for something, thinking that I got a real bargain because I didn't pay $400. So reducing your price underneath like a rounded 0 number is a good tactic. People will always believe they're getting value because of that, even if it's just $1 or a penny. And we don't even make pennies anymore. So that's still a useful tactic, and everybody still uses it, including Nike, which I'll talk about in reference to the price lining tactic. Nike has dozens of different running or shoe lines, including running shoes. And if you look at their running shoe line, go on to Nike's website now and take a look at their running shoes. They've got like dozens of different running shoes. I'm a Nike runner, so I know I have been victim to some of Nike's tactics over the years. So the price lining tactic says, well, here's our top of the line shoe. It ties itself. It's got the best insole. It's great in all weather conditions, indoor, outdoor, and it's $399 because Nike uses line pricing and odd pricing as well. The lowest end Nike shoe might be $69. Still allows you to run quite comfortably. May not last as long, might actually last longer, which is the irony. But that would be the lower end of the spectrum, and everything in between would increase or decrease based upon the different features that they have. So that's price lining. And last but not least is price bundling. Next time you go to a movie, which could be a while given our circumstance, you'll familiarize yourself with this concept when you go to buy your snack. And no one even tries anymore to buy a single popcorn on its own, or a drink, or a novelty candy item. It's always a bundle, right? And it's just too hard to go and try and buy them independently. So bundle pricing, the benefit of bundle pricing to the seller is it gets you to buy more stuff, much of which you don't even need. The benefit to you as a buyer is you get this perceived notion that you're getting a good deal. Now, are you getting a good deal because you're buying a lot of stuff at a lower price? Or are you getting a bad deal because you're buying things you don't need at a lower price? That is for you, the consumer, to figure out. So that's slide 10. Slide 11, second last slide, is reactive pricing. Everything we've talked about so far is planning to go to market with a price based on objectives and tactics and strategies and elements. We go to the market and nothing is more honest than the market. It will tell us you're too high or you're too low. How will you know if you're too low? People won't buy it. How will you know if you're too high? Everyone will buy it and you'll sell out and you won't be able to keep up with demand. Those are two sort of broad eventualities of pricing on either end of the spectrum. Of course, there's a lot of other things that go into it, as are noted on this slide. But a pricing change may be imminent, may be necessary. So you have to consider the effect of price changing not only on the impact to your operation, but also on the impact to how your customer perceives the quality of your product. So that's reactive pricing, slide 11. So we get to how does all this work its way into your current assignment on marketing mix analysis. You have to describe the pricing strategy. So of the 5 strategies that we included, try and decide which one you think is applied to the company that you've chosen. State the price of the product relative to its competitors. Make assumptions as to how your company arrived at its pricing objective based on what you think is relative demand for that kind of product and the costs that they have used to bring that product to market. And I know you're not in the boardrooms part of these conversations, so that's where the word assumptions comes into play. Maybe estimations is a better word. Use your observations. Use your newly found analytical powers to make some of these estimations and then write those into this section of your report. So that's it. I've been going on for 23 minutes. Hopefully that's not too long. Hopefully you're okay with this delivery of talks. Whether or not you are, you can always email me with any further questions at david.gaudette@sait.ca. Hope you're doing well. Keep in touch. Keep posted. Keep watching my email and keep picking up information here on D2L, and stand by for additional supplements that I'll be providing. Just watch your email for that. Take care. Bye-bye.